This is Mark Mullinax, and I welcome you back to our class, Power for the Peaceful, a podcast where we explore the wisdom of the Tao Te Ching using my 2021 translation published by Fortress Press. Today we'll be plunging into verse 63 in an episode entitled How Things Begin, Part 1. Part 2 will be our next episode, treating verse 64. So, I'm glad you're here.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
In the bulb, there is a flower. In the seed, an apple tree. In cocoons, a hidden promise. Butterflies will soon be free. There is a song in every silence, seeking word and melody. There is a dawn in every darkness, bringing hope to you and me. For the past will come the future, what it holds a mystery. Natalie Sleeth.
Thank you. Verse 63 challenges us to reflect upon the diverse applications of Wu Wei. First, the power of Wu Wei's simplicity. Second, how Wu Wei's virtuous action throughout all brings benefits to all. And I do mean all. And third, how Wu Wei's practice increases our wise discernment of how to see and then to address life's challenges early on, before those molehills become mountains. Above all, this verse points to the timeless wisdom for anyone, anywhere, anytime, which is this. You being yourself bears witness that in you, Tao began something wild and good. You doing you is the greatest gift you can give, not just to the world, but to your quality of life. And there is no wrong place or wrong time to start your gift infusion into our world. To guide our journey today, we'll start with my own translation of verse 63. Then we'll explore complementary quotes from great thinkers like Confucius, C.S. Lewis, and his friend J.R.R. Tolkien. My hope is that by the end of this episode, we'll have practical insights on how wise understandings about the nature of beginnings can be applied to life starting today. Joining us are Danai Chaisson and her partner David Chaisson. Did I say that right?
Good enough, yes.
Whose voices you will hear now as they introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is David Chaisson, and this is my wife.
Hi, I'm Danai Chaisson. We're second-year students at Taoist Traditions, and are really excited to be here today and talk about Wu Wei.
Okay, yeah. That's Taoist Traditions School of Chinese Medicine in Asheville, North Carolina. In this verse on beginnings, let us begin. Here is that verse in full.
Verse 63, Beginnings, Part 1. Act, but no meddling. Strive, but no pushing. Savor, but no indulging.
Magnify the small, multiply the few. Meet every malice with virtuous kindness. Handle all difficulties by anticipating them. Ensure great endings by attending to the small beginnings.
Sages know how the most difficult problems in the world can be nipped in the bud, or how the world's greatest affairs begin with humble roots.
By living simply, sages naturally churn out greatness. Conversely, a mediocre promise maker is a first-class trust breaker, and the one who promises everything is soon beset with difficulties, but not the sage who, by anticipating every complication, encounters none.
Thank you. So, first theme, acting without meddling. The opening of verse 63 sets the tone for a powerful life of peace.
Act, but no meddling. Strive, but no pushing. Savor, but no indulging.
These lines describe a way of living that is harmonious precisely because it is dignified, unhurried. However, let's retain the idea of Wu Wei being passive here. Lao Tzu encourages us to act, strive, and savor, but wisely and decisively, in moderation, without noisy or distracting its extremes. Once again, Wu Wei is a superpower of knowing when to stop, when to retire, to know in advance that point where Tao engagement ends and your ego begins to engage. When we meddle, push, or indulge, we unhinge things that were once in balance and begun a long time before we were alive. We force untimely and premature outcomes rather than allowing situations to unfold on their own natural timetable. So this teaching aligns perfectly with the Taoist principle of Wu Wei, or wise, effortless action. By acting in alignment with Tao, we avoid unnecessary action or effort, and therefore we encounter less resistance. We remain effective by doing just the necessary and then quitting. And this takes practice to know the difference between the necessary in the moment and what our ego would like in that moment. The practices of Wu Wei are the practices of balanced moderation, the etymology of which is French, suggesting only enough action to keep things within measure. That is, we act from roots that produce its unique fruits, but nothing else. Imagine an apple tree that wants to be a banana producer as well. We do what we are. I doing my true self, you doing you, and then retire. Rest, peace, harmony. Delusion not only camouflages reality from us, but also gives us a poor substitute for it. So the beginning of this verse, like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony's first four notes, dun 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 dun, begins and yet resonates throughout the verse on so many levels. It sets a theme for this verse and our next verse as well. Its central theme is the idea that all great things, whether successes or disasters, begin small. From this wisdom, we learn the importance of addressing life's beginnings carefully and intentionally. This is Lao Tzu's offering to us on how to live virtuously, with virtuosity, in a life rooted in simplicity, foresight, and humility. And here's Tao's power. Wherever and whenever you are, that's your starting point. As you act with humility, you also integrate what has been set in motion already rather than struggle against it. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. What we strive for, savor, and act upon has antecedent mixtures in life. The way to keep things stable and lasting is to honor that mix, whether begun by others or the natural world. So, my friends, do you have any thoughts or comments about this?
The first time that I was introduced to Wu Wei was back at OCOM, where we transferred from. It is very different than how I used to live my life, because I was always the type of person that would try and do everything and be everything for everyone. And I always had to actively be doing something. And when I was introduced to Wu Wei, it's the doing without doing, and letting things move out of you, out of the abundance and out of the ease. And David has actually really helped me in this. And so the idea of Wu Wei has really been an interesting change in my life the past 2.5 years, 3 years.
Would you like to add to that, David?
It's such a deep concept that it's hard to know what to add and what not to add, which I guess is related to this scripture that we're reading. And so, like, for me, it's always been interesting to muse about the whys of this advice, because very often when in the Tao Te Ching, there's the Tao is the ocean, and very often the Tao Te Ching is speaking about the rudder. And so when we read scriptures like this, my natural inclination is to go, why? Why is the easier path the small? Why is the powerful path the small? And like, it's sort of because the scripture that we're reading is instructions on how to navigate, and so he's not going into like why this is true in any sort of real way, but he is saying like he has a deep understanding of the Tao, and he's giving us sage advice from that perspective. And so like the deeper understanding of the Tao is that the Tao, by its nature, takes the small and makes them big, and takes the big and makes them small. And so if we try and take something big, if we try and conquer the world, if we try and like take on life in one big gulp, then the nature of the Tao is that it will humble us. And vice versa, if we act in small ways, it is the nature of the Tao that it will be magnified. And so it's a really interesting way of looking at this particular set of Tao navigating advice.
I must say that was pretty awesome. Thank you so much. Now, with this verse introduced, let's unpack the next sections of this verse with the timely help of Danai and David and some timeless wisdoms from others. So we go to our second theme, magnifying the small. Next, Lao Tzu writes,
Magnify the small, multiply the few, meet every malice with virtuous kindness.
This is a reminder, a call to pay attention to the small and subtle aspects of life. Too often, we focus on the grand and the obvious while ignoring the small beginnings that lead to them. Lao Tzu encourages us to magnify the small, to notice, respect it, care for it. In doing so, we prevent minor issues from growing into major crises. Just like in your garden, weed carefully and prune respectfully before that garden becomes a jungle. On the negative side of this teaching, I'm reminded of a quote by C.S. Lewis.
It's not a question of God sending us to hell. In each of us, there is something growing up which will, of itself, be hell unless it is nipped in the bud.
Here, Lewis echoes Lao Tzu's wisdom. Small things, whether habits, thoughts, or actions, grow into something far greater over time. But should we fail to address them early, they may become sources of great difficulty in our personal lives or relationships and in society. By, quote, nipping things in the bud, quote, as Lewis suggests, we exercise wisdom and foresight. I heard a news story yesterday that the rising suicide rates worldwide can be reduced if societies would just invest in more healthcare, education, and civic engagement. If you have faith that bad trends can be reversed, here's your method. Start small. As David said, a rudder is such a small part of a ship, and yet its most important navigational tool. Then, Lao Tzu also tells us to, quote, meet every malice with virtuous kindness, unquote. This is yet another reflection of Taoism's golden rule. Act virtuously, even in the face, especially in the face, of hostility. Kindness and humility are not signs of weakness. They are the Taoists' way of disarming negativity before it finds an anchor point. There's no need to treat anything or anyone worse than the other. The Taoist sage is into understanding, not changing. If there's any changing to be done, it's when people are first treated with virtue, kindness, respect. I find that when I'm understood by another, good changes happen in me naturally. So Wu-Wei action is then simply finding the correct next thing to do. And to do so first creates momentum, second carries forth that momentum into others and into the future, and third, nourish any situation like water would, moistening, cleaning, feeding the subtlest things with its custom-made currents and streams. You got any thoughts or questions or comebacks?
I just thought it was funny. I hadn't actually read your script before I made that rudder analogy. It's just
great minds. All right. Okay.
Danai, do you have something?
Just that the past few days, months, we've been talking about how our society is hurting. There's so many big things that need to be done. And there's so many people that are hurting that can be helped with something so small. In our current situation, we're students, we're living off of loans, and so we're also very much reliant on like food pantries. And it's something so small, but something so big and so impactful.
Yeah.
And for us, we wonder why it's so hard to do something like that. and to give to people who need it.
Yeah.
To even accept the help as well.
Mm.
And so starting small and allowing yourself to start small is really so big.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do. Like, it's not a natural. I mean, it's a natural thing. Given enough time, the Tao would do this on its own. We've been giving the opportunity to like participate, but it's not the natural response. Like the line that we just read ends in "meet every malice with virtuous kindness," and you were talking about earlier how like if an apple tree wanted to produce bananas, like that's ridiculous. And so when I'm cut off in traffic, the apple tree wants to produce an apple. I mean, the apple seed wants to produce an apple tree. Like that wrong in me, my natural response isn't like, I love that person. Like, it's not that. It's, a specific finger comes to mind. Like those sorts of things. And so like when we look at this particular section of the scriptures, again, my natural inclination is to be like, why? Why do we meet every malice with virtuous kindness? Because if it's just that surface level, just meet every bad thing with good thing, then it's just like a moral adage. It doesn't have power. It has a burden. Like, I have to be nice to this person. Like, but if you understand that, like, we're meeting malice with virtuous kindness because the virtuous kindness is the small thing that will grow. If you don't allow the virtuous kindness to be the small thing that grows, then that little slight that has entered into your heart and into your life will be the small thing that grows. And so here, the Tao Te Ching is describing a choice. It's doing that rudder thing. It's describing a choice that we have to either allow the slight to be the small thing that grows, because it is the nature of the Tao to have small things grow into larger things, or we have the choice to shift that rudder and make the small thing that grows a virtuous kindness.
I love this. Thank you so much.
When you're listening, are you listening?
Well, next, we have a third theme. Attend to beginnings. Lao Tzu continues his verse.
Handle all difficulties by anticipating them. Ensure great endings by attending to their small beginnings.
Or, as Ho Shang Kung phrased it,
To act without acting means to do only what is natural. To work without working means to avoid trouble by preparing in advance.
this verse moved me into a sense of poetry, because my next thought is set out in poetry. And that is, if you don't start or begin to button your shirt at the bottom, the origin button, then you can just forget about ending well. So here goes my poem. It's called The First Button. Ever start with the wrong button? Every clasp askew, the shirt pulled tight, an awkward weave of threads that fight against the body that they were meant to hold? Perhaps the error wasn't near the hem, but in that first deliberate choice, a buttonhole untouched, ignored, but the one of balance, empty but whole. How often the ego, bold and blind, grasps for power, skips the seam where equality waits, a quiet anchor. To start again requires unmaking, a patience for unthreading knots, a trust in origins, the gentle hand of Wu Wei guiding. Begin again. The first button holds the center. For me, this is the heart of verse 63 and of next time 64. Tao sages and even you and I can learn actually to predict the future, for the sages acknowledge or understand in advance. They can anticipate that with Tao there is nothing, no thing that is not in keeping with it. Since there's nothing Tao cannot withstand or merge into its overall processes, sages can see the ways things are going before things go any which way. I'm sure we've all had premonitions or thoughts to ourselves, this is not going to turn out well. This is because Tao resides in each of us. The sage is just more practiced at the premonitions. That said, perhaps we can now see how or why the sage, like Tao, abandons no one, not even those who we might dismiss or disdain. In Wang Chen's phrasing,
If a ruler does not pay attention to small matters, eventually they will overwhelm even the greatest virtue. Thus the sage takes care, lest a small matter become something great. For if he waits until something is great before he acts, his actions will come too late.
okay, how does the sage act? They may appear to remain uninvolved, on the sidelines, but sages consider themselves to be like carefully placed stones in a stream, subtly altering the flow of that water below and anticipating every current's effect downstream. Since the sage sees the large in the small and future complexities in the simple present, attending to things' small beginnings before they get out of control seems to be the key Wu-wei message. Rather than chasing after the grandiose, the sage keeps her focus on the small details, simply doing one thing at a time for one single purpose. Like a parent, the sage already knows that their child may grow up to wear size 11 shoes, but they don't begin with size 11, they begin with size 1 shoes, knowing that there will be a time for size 11. They see no need to rush. And this is a proactive Wu-wei, to recognize first and then address problems before they arise. The way to ensure its success is to begin small things with wise intention, because small beginnings matter. They set the tone for everything that follows. Anything big starts small. If you have a big job to do, we break it up into small slices. If something feels tough, we start with the simple parts. Smart folks don't try to do everything all at once, but taking one small step at a time, like a good teacher, patient with their students, they do amazing things. However, this idea applies both to the good habits as well as to the bad. Surely, I don't have to remind us of all those little bad habits that we may have begun long ago. Habits which have also had their small steps at a time. Habits which grow up and take ever larger percentages of our time and treasure. Which reminds me of a quote from C.S. Lewis.
It is not a question of God sending us to hell. Rather, in each of us there is something growing up, which will of itself be hell, unless it is nipped in the bud.
Nipped in the bud. Lewis echoes Lao Tzu's wisdom. Small things, whether habits, thoughts, or actions, can sometimes grow out of control over time. And like our garden metaphor, should we fail to address things early, great difficulties arise. This applies to the entirety of life, personal, societal, economic, healthcare, infrastructure, race relations. By nipping things in the bud, as Lewis suggests, we exercise wisdom and foresight. One famous or infamous example of not nipping things in the bud began in 1619, the after effects of which still haunt us today. I'm talking about bringing 20 to 30 enslaved Africans to American shores. It seemed such a small matter at the time. J.R.R. Tolkien, lifelong friend and university colleague of C.S. Lewis, worked on this idea of small things becoming larger, but in a different sense. It's not just about small things growing large from humble beginnings, but of small or insignificant people being able to turn the wheels of history forward. From Tolkien's Fellowship of the Ring, we read,
The road must be trod, but it will be very hard. This quest may be attempted by the weak with as much hope as the strong. Yet it is of the course of deeds that move the wheel of the world. Small hands do them because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere.
Tolkien, a Catholic, perhaps took his cue from the New Testament's rather stunning reminder about the power of the small and the not powerful in the ways of the world. Listen to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 27 and 28.
God chooses what is foolish in the world to shame the wise, what is weak in the world to shame the strong, what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to abolish things that are.
So, with 1 Corinthians, we can return to Lao Tzu. Sages know how the most difficult problems in the world can be nipped in the bud. The world's greatest affairs begin with humble roots. Wisdom traditions in our world agree. Recognize the power of the humble and of humble beginnings if you want long-lasting success. Great journeys and great deeds often begin in obscurity, or as in verse 67's parlance, they begin with our first steps. the small hands taking the first steps. This is a major theme, especially in a world where power is often sought and used only for the powerful, which has rarely worked, by the way, no matter how small or insignificant we may feel. Our actions have profound and often unpredicted consequences. Call this the butterfly effect or chaos theory. Small events can result in unpredictable consequences over a period of time. If you want a fictional adaptation of this idea, by all means, run, don't walk, and find Ray Bradbury's short story called A Sound of Thunder. This story portrays people using a time machine to return to the days of the dinosaurs, but they were not careful. They shoot a dinosaur. Just that one tiny, itsy-bitsy intervention 65 million years ago changed their present world for the worse, something they realized only when they returned to the present day. I shall not spoil the ending for you, but send you off to read this fascinating and highly recommended story for yourself. The end of my discussion here is this. The processes of Tao were operational and in place before the beginning and are baked into our natural processes now. We live in a self-balancing universe where the hidden processes of Wu Wei and Yin Yang have been a long time coming. So what we see or experience today has also been a long time coming. So be careful with our fat-fingered and unwise efforts to meddle in processes begun long ago and probably we don't understand. Don't shoot the modern equivalent of dinosaurs. Balance happens thanks to Tao, its virtue Te, its Wu Wei, and Yin and Yang. That balance may not bring exactly what you expected, but it is an alignment that our interruptions would only frustrate and delay. Not forever, mind you, but it'll just take a little longer. Be wise of anything that would tilt that balance. From Tao Te Ching, verse 4.
Tao blunts every sharp edge. It untangles every knot. Its brilliance merges deep in the dusty world, beyond our fat finger words and ways to frame it. So profoundly hidden, still and clear. It hardly appears, but that is the way it is.
Before we go to the fourth theme, our last one, do you have any thoughts about what we've heard and said and thought about so far?
More of, I think maybe advice is that we're talking about nipping things in the bud, and we're talking about wuai, which is the act of doing nothing. And so I feel like it's worth pointing out why it's so hard to do the small things. So nipping it in the bud is an action. It's not that we're wuaiing so much. Like, Lao Tzu didn't die of starvation. Like, he acted. It's like, so wuai isn't the absence of acting. It's something deeper than that. And so very often when we try and apply the small things principle, we get discouraged because the small things don't look like what we wanted the small things to look like. And so, for example, like, let's say you know a man is hungry and you prepare him a meal, and you put out the silverware and the plates and you prepare this wonderful meal in hopes that you might feed him. And he comes to the table and he goes, "Oh my goodness, thank you so much. I didn't have anything to eat with." And he takes the silverware and he goes home and eats with it. Did you fail or succeed at feeding the man? Very often, when we try and do something small and we try and work with the Tao, we get frustrated because it doesn't look like what we want it to look like. It doesn't turn out the way we want it to turn out, even though it's still turning out the way the Tao is making it turn out. And so wuai, I think, in my life in particular, the absence of action is applied to the desire for a particular result. The small things are actions. Don't stop doing the small things because you're trying to wuai so hard that you stop doing everything. But wuai when you feel that pang of like disappointment or frustration when the Tao took your small thing and made it into what it wanted instead of what you envisioned it to becoming. So
Wuai is is starting small. And so we are transfers from OCOM, which unfortunately recently shut down. But one of the classes that we had to take in our first quarter of our first year was Tai Chi. And our Tai Chi instructor, he had us stand in horse stance for the entire 2-hour session, as much as we can handle. And he was like, no, just Wyatt, and just do without doing. And it was hard.
I've never sweated so much in my life.
I think because I was doing so much and not really doing the not doing part, that there's a spot in my shoulder that I think I injured myself because I was trying to do too much of it. But why is difficult, but it is worth it in being able to just flow with whatever life is passing at you and throwing or trying to drown you under. When you are in Wuai, when you're in touch with the Tao, you are able to flow through life a little easier. It's not that you're not going to face hardships or hurricanes or whatever. But when you realize and you've taken those small steps, those big things seem a little smaller.
It makes me think of another biblical scripture when Jesus fell asleep in the ship when the storm was brewing. There's some powerful wuai right there.
Wu Wei, as I say, Wu Wei. Wu Wei is kind of difficult to understand. It's also pretty difficult to do by not doing something, by learning how to retire that part of you that wants to go on and get results. And that retirement, knowing when to stop, is what I'm now coming at as the basic understanding of Wu Wei. Is just knowing when to shut things down.
Are you listening? When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening?
Well, let's go to our fourth and final theme, simplicity and trust.
By living simply, sages naturally churn out greatness. Conversely, a mediocre promise maker is a first-class trust breaker, and the one who promises everything is soon beset with difficulties.
Confucius offers a similar warning in the Analects.
When words are uttered without modesty, living up to them is difficult.
So this passage highlights the importance of living with pervasive integrity and truthfulness. No vacations. Lao Tzu contrasts the sage who keeps life simple and focused with the heedless promise maker who overcommits, weaves webs of convenient lies, and ultimately gets caught in them to reveal how powerless they are to deliver a damn thing. This verse is a cautionary tale about the dangers of trying to do too much or trying to be everything to everyone. Inauthenticity erodes trust, first in ourselves and then in others. It's contagious. The sage avoids this trap by remaining grounded, modest, focused on what the truly true, the true, as David Mitchell's novel Cloud Atlas phrases it. So why not just be as free, flexible, trusting, and open as the day you were born? For in the beginning, at the start of your life, that's who you are. You don't have to learn to fake anything, for all the real goodness in you is already there, just awaiting your permission to bring your true treasures out. At any given moment, you are the exact Tao presence that a world forgetful of Tao needs. Purity of heart, as Soren Kierkegaard's small classic is entitled, is to will one thing. By doing that one true, we not only avoid unnecessary difficulties, but we also cultivate a sense of peace and clarity. One thing. For purity of heart, will one thing. So, my friends, any thoughts on this last section?
I think I've said it before, but I would always overcommit myself. I'm the type of person that if you ask for help, or if I see, even if I think that you might need help, I'm going to offer it. And that has gotten me into being a very stressed out person, because I'm trying to keep all these commitments, because I truly do want to help, and I truly do think, like, even if I do something small, it's going to be good. But that's not giving out of my own abundance and my own peace. That's taking away from my own peace. And so I have learned that I need to be more cautious with my promise givings.
Okay.
And so it's been a really difficult learning process.
Yeah.
But it's been good, because when I am actually able to help someone, I'm really able to help them and not half-heartedly help them.
Yeah. Let's summarize the overarching themes of verse 63. First, we act with simplicity. Avoid the meddling, pushing, indulging. Instead, align yourself with the natural flow of life, or reality. Second, pay attention to beginnings. Small actions, small habits, and small problems all have the potential to grow into something far greater. Address them with care and foresight. Be careful how you button your shirt. Third, live with integrity. Avoid making promises you cannot keep. Instead, focus on what truly matters so actions match words and situations. These teachings are just not abstract ideals. The garden is ever our metaphor. Plant those small seeds, then fertilize and water, and then wait in the very sure expectation that something has begun that will culminate in good. Verse 63 contains practical ethics we can apply to our daily lives, whether it's how we approach our work, our relationships, or our personal growth. The wisdom of verse 63 reminds us to start small, stay humble, and remain true to the Tao within. So in this verse is the coalescence of Tao, De, Wu Wei, and Yin Yang. It's packed. David and Danai, do you have any last words? Have we missed anything?
I would just say, advice-wise, just before trying to direct the small things through Wu-Wei, spend time in the presence of Wu-Wei. And so spending time in meditation, not trying to direct or change or plant the small seeds, but just sort of living in or breathing in that meditative and sort of connecting with the Tao's nature in that way. Spending time passively in that prepares you for the application of that. And so don't neglect the Wu-Wei of the Wu-Wei, if you could say it that way.
Yeah, I think that you can actually learn prediction by practicing Wu-Wei. I think you can learn that prediction, that predictive quality of how life sometimes unfolds.
Whenever I think of Wu-Wei, I imagine this Tai Chi master just practicing Tai Chi, and the movements are so slow and minute, but you know that their movements are so powerful. They've practiced from just standing in horse stance for 2 hours each time. And they've slowly built up their foundation and grown into what they are now. And there was a story that David thought of a couple of days ago on how something small that he did was huge for one of our friends. And I'm not sure if he wants to share.
No, we were talking about how the greatest, sort of the biggest and most complete expression of like something small becoming into something big is absolutely nothing becoming absolutely everything. And this happens constantly, but we don't get the opportunity to see it often because we're just not paying attention to it, or we aren't blessed with the privilege of seeing it. And I had a moment in my life where I got to see that. And so years ago, when we were living in California, a friend of mine, Cameron, who I love immensely, he had been in a car accident. He was fine, But he was a kid at the time, living under his parents' roof.
19 or something
19
like
or
that.
so. And the parents' car, basically. And so he was distraught, and he had to navigate the whole, like, disappointment of the parent and, like, stress of that. And he came over to our place because we were doing a children's ministry Bible study that
Youth
day.
group.
He was a youth group.
He was one of the leaders with us.
And he just came in and he told me he'd been in a car accident. And I didn't have a fix. There's no way I can fix that in any way. And I just turned to him. I said, "You hungry?" And he went, "Yeah." And so I went and I made him some food. It was nothing to me. Like, I had been making this food already. I was planning on eating later that day. I added some spices for him that I knew he liked, and then I gave it to him, and he ate. We
had him sit in a separate little area from the
had
youth.
Quiet space. He stayed. We did the children's ministry. He left. Years later, when I was giving him some other advice about something else, he said to me, like, that was a pivotal moment in his life. Like, he looks back on that moment as how to help other people in places like that. And it was the biggest thing for him in that moment. It meant everything to him in that moment. And so something that was nothing to me was everything to him in that moment. And I had no clue. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a clue until years later. Yeah. He's a grown man now. Like, he told me this. And it was an immense blessing that I got to peek into the window of, like, the Tao, and having something that was meaningless to me become something immense to that person. Yeah. So it was really cool.
I hope every listener has a similar story, or actually lives into that story, because that is such a rush. And it's not ego. It's just this, you're in touch with just the deepest of gratitude that, something that you're a part of helps somebody else. It's amazing. Finally, as we do, we're going to end with a child-friendly version of verse 63.
Verse 63. Start small, think big. Act, but don't mess things up. Do good work, but don't push people around doing it. Enjoy things, but don't go overboard.
Treat little things as important. The shirt buttons right only from the bottom button, the one that doesn't show. Answer unkindness with kindness. Solve problems before they become big. Great success starts with tiny steps.
The wise know that even the hardest problems begin small. The biggest jobs all started simple.
Just do you, and learn the wisdom of true greatness. But those who make empty promises or don't plan, their failure shows up fast. Not the wise, though. They have a good sense of coming trouble and avoid it.
This free podcast is a production of many. Thank you, Danai and David, for your so cool voices this episode. We don't forget Audrey Davis on artwork, nor Molly Hartwell's song and voice. Fortress Press holds the copyright for quotations from my David Ching translation used here. May your days begin, May your days begin in baby steps of peace, and become the bountiful labs and wombs for the ever-present and custom-made hope our world requires.